On today's MMS Innovation Interview Series, I'm excited to be joined by Zach Weingarden to talk about the needs of the life sciences industry to communicate with patients regarding the purpose and results of the trials they volunteered for. We'll also talk about how TrialAssure enables our clients to efficiently engage with patients for these types of communications. Zach is the Senior Product Solutions Manager for TrialAssure and has been with the company since 2014. His background is in healthcare IT, specifically in the design, development, and implementation of electronic medical records systems and software products, most recently focused in the areas of clinical research and trial transparency. Zach is the proud graduate of the University of Michigan, where he received both his bachelor's and master's degree in engineering. Zach, thanks for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
So we're here to talk about the industry's efforts to be transparent with trial participants regarding the trials they volunteered for. How is the industry responding to the growing compliance requirements for clinical trial transparency?
So the industry as a whole has acknowledged and really embraced the need for transparency in clinical trials and clinical research in a couple of different ways. And the focus in more recent years has been addressing the gap between what is ultimately needed and what is currently done in common practice for various reasons, and identifying what obstacles and roadblocks there are and challenges that exist, and how technology can be leveraged in order to help pave the way to a more transparent and open environment. And so when we talk about transparency broadly, we're talking about a number of different things, but primarily one is the need to share data and information with one group of researchers with another. This has tremendous potential value in speeding up the development of life-saving or life-altering products, getting them to patients faster and getting more effective treatments on the market as quickly as possible by leveraging things that we've already studied or someone has already studied, using that data. And so that's done in ways like through anonymization, text analytics, machine learning, and other forms of artificial intelligence are helping to streamline and speed up that process so that you're able to share information in a way that is safe in terms of protecting people's privacy, competitive information, company confidential information, as well as preserving the integrity of the data that's being shared. All of these things are very important, and with advances in technology, you're able to more quickly prepare data so that it can be shared more effectively. The other is more of an ethical obligation on behalf of the researcher, the trial sponsor, and sharing the outcome of the trial with the participants who were involved in it. They put their safety, or in some cases their lives, at risk for the betterment of science. So they deserve to understand what was the purpose of the trial and what was learned when it was completed. And so that's where the plain language summary comes into play.
So you mentioned plain language summary. Tell me more about what's included in this document, how it benefits the patient, and how it benefits our industry as a whole.
Sure. So a plain language summary is basically a document that is written after the conclusion of a clinical trial, after the data has been analyzed and the results are determined. And its intent and purpose is to inform the participants what the trial was for, how it was organized and structured, what we were intending to find out, and whether ultimately it was successful, and what side effects came up, and what was learned ultimately. From an industry perspective, it's very useful because not only does it, inform the participants what this important information, but it also keeps them engaged so that they're more likely to follow up in the future and potentially participate in other clinical trials.
What are some of the regulations and driving forces around PLS documents?
Well, PLS, plain language summaries, have always been, for a lot of sponsors, something that has been done. So they're not really new in terms of just being something that is typically done, but regulations are starting to require them. So the EU, Europe CTR regulation is one that I believe is the first to formally require them. There's also various industry codes and guidelines that recommend the distribution of plain language summaries, like the FPIA and things of that nature, that define the importance of these documents.
So it sounds like educating other researchers and, of course, the patients about the results of the trial is beneficial to everyone, but it can't be easy. What are some of the challenges in producing lay summaries?
Yeah, exactly. It's not easy. The main challenge, the crux of the issue, is that this is a document that needs to be well understood by the average person or the average participant in a given trial. So it needs to be distilled down into a 6th to 8th grade reading level. It needs to be produced in different languages depending on who was in the trial. And it needs to be something that people are actually going to read if they receive it. It has to have, the good use of graphics and images instead of just lengthy text. There's recommendations around font size and understandability. A lot of best practices that are fairly well established at this point. A lot of analysis is going into these types of these documents and how they're written and prepared. But they're also continuing to evolve as we learn more about what works well and what doesn't, and how people are understanding this information. But so as you can imagine, it's extremely difficult to take a technical, very scientific information about the clinical trial and translate that into something that is simple and easy to understand. It's very tough to do, and requires a very unique skill set to do that and write something that can be understood effectively, but still captures the meaning and the outcome and purpose of the trial in a way that maintains the truth about what the trial entailed. And so there's often, like I said, a unique skill set involved, and also several processes of review involving lay review panels, things like that. And then, of course, you've got to account for the translation as well, and translating that into different languages and ensuring that how it reads in those languages makes sense to the participants. So it's a very complicated process, and more challenging than you might think at first.
So we've talked about the purpose and the requirements of plain language summaries. How is TrialAssure meeting the requirements for transparency?
We're staying on the forefront of this because this is a very important area in transparency. We've developed an industry-leading solution called TrialAssure Link, and it's part of our TrialAssure Transparency Suite. And what Link does is it provides the ability to pull data from existing systems or existing documents and populates a pre-built, pre-designed template for your plain language summary. So it can, pull from your registry, clinicaltrials.gov registry record, for example, or your clinical study report. And this allows it's not going to produce the entire lay summary on its own, but it's going to create graphics, put the information where it needs to be, and allow the writer to focus on the specific elements that the writer is adding the most value, where a human really needs to write this section, and not necessarily spending as much time on designing a flow chart or copying a list of side effects or something like that. So it really takes a lot of the tedious aspects out of the writer's job and allows them to focus on what they do best.
So you mentioned the time that it can save, and anytime you mention time savings, people are going to ask how much. So how much time will Link save writers in the creation of lay summaries?
That's a really good question, and that can obviously vary a lot depending on your template. But what we found in prototype testing was that by integrating Link with a solid, robust data set, you're able to save 75% of the drafting time, actually, by just allowing the writer to focus on a few key areas and pre-populating the rest.
That's an amazing amount of time that it can allow them to focus on other tasks. That's amazing. So what are some of the data sources that feed a PLS?
Question. So structured data is obviously a good place to start. So registry postings like clinicaltrials.gov, UDRCT, those are very good sources. They've got result data already tagged and categorized and things like that so that the system can pull it, it knows what it is, and it knows how to present it in a plain language summary. But also written documents, clinical study reports, protocol, informed consent forms, things like that. The system is able to process those and read the text and then translate that as well. So especially if they're written in a consistent template, which typically you see, and it could be whether it's a Transcelerate type template or just one that is used consistently by a sponsor. The system's able to pull out pieces of information and it knows what type of information that is and how to translate that and place that into the plain language summary appropriately. You can also integrate with source systems as well, so like your clinical trial management system or a data warehouse or something like that. So you can pull discrete data out of those systems, and those can help drive other aspects and pieces of your document.
How much of this is automated versus requiring human interaction to write and summarize the summaries?
Yeah, so like I said, about 75% of the document is automated. And that depends on how you construct your template and what pieces of information you get out of your source documents, of course. But yeah, the standard out of the box template, we try to maximize the use of automation as much as possible. In some cases, it still requires a human to write the section, like for example, summarizing the overall results of the trial. It's extremely difficult to automatically write that by a machine. That probably always is something that a writer is going to have to translate into human terms. But what we automate and focus on is things like creating graphics automatically, like a flow chart that describes the conduct of the trial and the structure of how the trial went. Maybe a graphic describing the demographics of the patient population, the randomization, things like that, where the system can pull exact data and then populate the document with different graphics. The other big area is replacing scientific or medical technical terminology with preferred lay terms that can be pre-configured and then on a sponsor by sponsor basis be customized. So you might have a preferred term for subjects. You might want to call them participants or patients or whatever, and you're able to configure that so it's used consistently in all of your plain language summaries. And then finally, automating the distribution process is a big point. And often a challenge, especially when you have a multi-year study. But knowing, where your sites and participants are located, and then being able to distribute these documents in the right language, electronically or mailed, but being able to automate that process as well is a huge component.
You mentioned that Link is a part of the TrialAssure Transparency Suite. What other transparency capabilities does TrialAssure offer?
Yeah, so we offer software across the area of clinical trial transparency. So that includes trial registration and results postings on public registries like clinicaltrials.gov or UDRCT. It includes data anonymization, preparation of data so that can be shared with other researchers on data sharing platforms. Document anonymization and redaction, a similar concept, but applying transformation so that clinical documents can also be shared with other researchers or the public. And then overall transparency, workflow management, compliance tracking.
Well, we definitely have some exciting and interesting things happening at TrialAssure. So Zach, I really appreciate your time talking to me about clinical trial transparency, talking to me about TrialAssure Link. Thank you.
My pleasure, Jim. Thank you.